Welcome everyone to Pathways to the Orchard. Tonight is Parshat Sh'lach Lecha. We're going to be looking at three different questions that have been asked throughout the ages. And we'll see, we'll have to develop it, but the questions are going to be is, whose idea was it to send the spies? Second is, what were the motivations of the spies when they went and when they came back with an evil report? And thirdly, what was Moshe's motivations in agreeing to send the spies? This is truly one of the most complicated matters in the Torah. As we're going to see, there are many, many different opinions, possibilities, and we can honestly say, in a certain sense, we'll never really know because, again, it's very nuanced, it's very subtle, and because of all the different opinions, each person can form their own opinion, but I'm just mentioning that there are many, many different opinions as we are about to explore. So let's look at the beginning of the Parsha, Parshat Sh'lach Lecha. It says, Vayedaber Hashem LaMoshe limor. God spoke to Moshe, saying, Sh'lach Lecha anashim v'yaturu et eretz Canaan asher ani noten livnei Yisrael. Ish echad lamatei avotav Tishalach kol nasi bahem. I'm going to translate now, and here we're going to see the beginning of the, call it the problem, the difficulty. So God spoke to Moshe saying, send, or you should send men to spy out the land of Canaan that I am giving to the children of Israel. One person from each tribe of their fathers. You shall send the prince of each of the tribes. So the simple translation is, especially when it begins, Vayedaber Hashem LaMoshe limor, God spoke to Moshe saying, send spies to spy out the land, one prince from each, or one leader at least, from each one of the tribes. So you would think this is an open and closed case. If we ask the question, who decided, or whose idea was it to send spies? From the simple literal reading of the text, it seems clear that God commanded Moshe to send spies. But look what Rashi says. Rashi, of course, he's depending on one of the opinions of the sages. And he says like this, L'da'atcha, when it says Sh'lach Lecha, you could translate it as you should send, or you send. But here Rashi is reading it, again, according to one of the opinions of the sages, is if basically like there's something happening before this. And God is saying, if you want to send spies, it's on your account. It's your decision. L'da'atcha. It's for you to decide. Ani eini mitzaveh lecha. I am not commanding you. In tirtzeh shalach. If you want, send. Lefi sheba'u Yisrael v'amru. Now this is going, it's spoken about in the book of Devarim. It's not spoken about here, but later when Moshe is relaying to the new generation some of the events in the Midbar, in the 40 years in the desert, excuse me, he goes back over the story And there it fills in that the people came to Moshe and said, can we please send spies before we go into the land? Can we please send spies to check it out? So that's what Rashi is bringing. So in other words, when we have here that God commanded Moshe saying, send, there's something happened before. The people came to Moshe. And now God is saying, if you want to send, I'm not commanding you. But if you're going to send one representative from each tribe and let them be one of the leaders, not just anyone. Rashi continues. Okay, so he just brings the quote from Devarim. Moshe nimlach b'shechina, and Moshe took advice with God, with the Shekhinah, with the divine presence. Amar, ani amarti lehem shehi tova. So what does the Shekhinah say to Moshe? Moshe says, should I send spies or shouldn't I? So the Shekhinah says to Moshe, I already told you that it was a good land. In other words, actually the Torah said many times that it's a good land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, has been repeated many times. Shneimar, and then God quotes the verse in the Torah, Elechem me'ani Mitzrayim, I have brought you out of the sufferings of Mitzrayim, and I will bring you to a goodly land of flowing with milk and honey. Chayehem shani noten lehem makom letaot. So God says to Moshe, you should know that I am giving a place for them to make a mistake, b'divrei maraglim, with the report that the maraglim will bring, laman lo yirashuha, in order that this generation will not inherit the land. So if you paid attention to this Rashi, the implications are mind-blowing. Is here we see how complicated this is. First of all, God says, I am not commanding you. If you want to send, you send. And then it says that Moshe took advice with God, and God said, I go ahead and send. This way, if they make a mistake and they decide they don't want to come in the land, that will be the excuse that I need not to let them to come into the land. So this implies a lot of things. It implies, first of all, that God might have planned the entire time not to let this generation come into the land. That's one of the implications here. That God, of course, knows the future. So when he says, I told them it's a good land, and now they want to send spies to check it out, well, I'm going to give them a chance. So here we see there's a very, very fine line between free choice and God's omniscience. God is alluding that they are going to make a mistake. The Meraglim are going to come back with an evil report. And therefore, in a sense, I'll have the excuse not to let them in the land, which implies that all along God had planned that they would not come into the land. This was a generation of slaves, and that God was waiting for a new generation that would have a different mentality. That's the implications. Now, an important statement, a very important statement, I've made it before, but it's important to make it again, is that Rashi is held in the highest esteem by everyone. Everyone holds Rashi in the highest esteem. And I have to say, in all of the books that I write, one of the people I quote more than anyone is Rashi. Rashi is so indispensable to understanding the Torah. But we sometimes make a mistake and say that everything that Rashi says that's exactly how it was. That's exactly the right opinion. But that's not correct. We'll see the Ramban, in many cases, and almost in most cases, disagrees with Rashi. And here is one of many, many times that the Ramban does not agree with Rashi's whole take on this. Now, again, this is not Rashi's mindset exclusively. He's basing it on one of the opinions of Chazal, but you can see that this is very complicated because Rashi, in one of his comments, says, I have only come to explain the simple literal meaning of the text. And everyone quotes this. Everyone quotes, and it's in Rashi's own words. But paradoxically, ironically, that in many cases, maybe even most cases, Rashi brings the Midrash to explain the simple meaning. The Midrash is already the allegorical, the symbolic, the metaphorical, the parable level of understanding the Torah. And so many times Rashi brings the parable, the allegory, to explain the simple meaning of the Torah. So here, this is just an introduction, just to show how complicated it is, just to understand, well, was it Moshe who decided to send? Was it God ultimately? Because Moshe took advice from God. And God was almost saying, yeah, send spies. If they happen to come back with a good report, then they'll go into the land. But again, it's implying heavily that God knew what the result would be. And here he didn't say to Moshe, no, don't send them. They're going to come back with an evil report. And then I'm not going to allow this generation to come in. It's almost as if God wanted this to happen. So now let's look at different opinions why Moshe in the end did agree to send. Moshe was not a weak leader. When he came down from Mount Sinai and he saw them dancing around the golden calf, he took charge. And many times with Korach, the portion is coming up. When there was a rebellion, Moshe took a strong stand. And when they wanted to sometimes go back to Egypt, or they wanted to stone Moshe and Aaron, he was not a weak leader. So in theory, Moshe could have said, I understand that you want to send spies, but God already promised us it's a good land, and God would not allow us to go into the land if we could not conquer it. He could have said such a thing, but he doesn't. And that's what the Ramban hints here, that the whole idea of sending spies is quite natural. It's quite natural. If you're about to send an army to conquer a land, wouldn't you want to know what the land is like? Wouldn't you want to know what the people are like, what the cities are like? What's the best way to enter, get a feel of the land? Like any army in the world has intelligence, has plans for all kinds of different scenarios. So that's what the Ramban says. The Ramban says, first of all, there's a reason to look at the people as like of little faith that they asked to send spies. But the Ramban doesn't hold like that. He says it was quite natural. And he even brings later, Moshe himself sent spies in one of the wars that will be coming up. And Yeshua is one of the 12 spies. He and Caleb come back and they don't agree with the 10 spies. The 10 spies say, it's a beautiful land. Here are the fruits. We brought back the fruits, but the people are too strong for us. We will not be able to conquer them. And Yeshua and Caleb, especially Caleb, said, no, of course we can go in. God promised us we can go in. And Yeshua, who's one of the spies, when it's time to conquer Jericho, he sends spies to check out Jericho. So that's what the Ramban says. It's not, you can't like look at the people like, oh, they had such little faith. It was a very natural thing to do. And Moshe himself sent spies later, and Yeshua sent spies. So he explains, and he also brings the opinion. I didn't read it all, but I'll try to do it quickly. What he tells the spies. He says to them, I'm just going to paraphrase this. He says, tell us what the land is like and the people that sit in the land. Are they strong or are they weak? Are they few or are they many? And what is the land like? Is it a good land or is it not a bad land? And what are the cities like? Are they fortified? Do they have walls? Is it a fruitful land? And later, I'm going to mention it now. This will be the second insight. He says a very almost mysterious thing. He says, Hayesh ba'etz im ayin. Is there a tree or not? And strengthen yourselves and bring back the fruit of the land. So we're going to go back later to this idea of what is Moshe saying? Is there a tree or not? But for right now, we're going to continue that in other words, he gave the spies a task. And when the spies came back, they really answered his questions quite honestly. The truth is the people were strong. And Ramban points this out, that later in the book of Devarim, Moshe himself, when he's encouraging the people to get ready to conquer the land, he tells them, he says, the people of the land are stronger than you, but God is with you. That will be the whole difference. So the fact that the spies came back, first of all, they said it's a goodly land. It's a productive land. Here is the fruit. And they brought back these enormous fruits to show everyone. The only thing that they did wrong is they came to the conclusion that, in other words, they were supposed to just come back with a report, not their opinion of what to do. But they gave their opinion that the people are too strong. We will not be able to conquer them. And the people reacted with fear and said, let's choose new leaders and let's go back to Egypt. Like, we didn't wander. Now here you have to understand, this is only in the second year they're in the desert. They were supposed to go into the land right then. They were about to go into the land. That's why they sent spies. In the end, we know the result. In this parsha, God says, a year for a day. They went and they spied the land for 40 days. So God says a year for a day, a year for a day. And that's the whole thing of the 40 years in the desert. Okay, so let's look at the motivation of Moshe. And each one of these we could go into great detail, but in order to save time, I'm going to fairly briefly bring a number of different opinions. So the first thing, and I'm not bringing in any particular order, but we could say this was bad judgment by Moshe. Now we know that our leaders are not invincible. They're not perfect. And just like Moshe made a major, major mistake by taking the mixed multitude, the Erev Rav. It's a huge mistake. So one could say that Moshe, instead of putting his foot down, instead he went along with it. He went along with it. And you could say that was bad judgment on Moshe's part. He should have understood that there was a very big chance that the spies would come back with not a good report. And there's a hint to this, because here Moshe adds the letter Yud to Yehoshua's name, Joshua's name. Till then he was called Hosea, even though in the Torah he was already called Yoshua. But here the Torah tells us that Moshe added a letter to his name. Rashi there says, in order to give him strength not to listen to not to go along with the evil report of the spies. Yud equals 10. And 10, that was the number of the spies that gave an evil report. Just Yoshua and Caleb were encouraging Israel to go into the land. So if Moshe is giving Yoshua a Yud to strengthen him, so we can understand that he already understood that there might be a problem here. So we could say it was bad judgment on Moshe's part. Rashi says something different, not here, in the book of Devarim, when Moshe goes over it. And he brings a very interesting parable, trying to show why did Moshe go along with this. So he brings a parable of a person who is selling a donkey. And a person comes and says, I'd like to buy your donkey, but I kind of want to take a trial drive, like this, buying a new car. It's very difficult to buy a car without a trial run. And so the person who wants to buy the donkey says, how is it on the mountains? He says, oh, he's great. He's great in the mountains. The person says, well, can I take him for a test drive to the mountains? And the person says, for sure, go ahead. He's great in the mountains, you'll see. So Rashi brings this, that when the person who wants to buy it hears this, it's like, oh, he's not afraid for me to take him into the mountains. It must mean that he really is good in the mountains. So therefore, Moshe was hoping when he said, yeah, you could send spies if you want, that the people would say, oh, if Moshe would allow us to send spies, obviously he thinks that everything is good and we can just trust in God. That's what Rashi says. That's one of the possibilities. That's how we started. There are many possibilities of how to understand how the story evolved. Another possibility is that Moshe sees that the people are very serious and sincere, and they want to check out the land. That's what the Ramban is saying. It makes perfect sense that they wanted to check out the land. So Moshe goes along with it because it sounds good. It's reasonable. And like we said, Moshe himself sends spies later. The other possibility is we have this expression, seeing is believing. So up to this point in the Torah, God has told Israel, I'm bringing you to a land flowing with milk and honey. So Moshe thinks, I'll let them see, they'll come back. And in fact, they did come back. They came back and they said, it's an incredibly fruitful land. It's a good land. Here are the fruits. And by all accounts, there were these huge fruits. You know, until today, the symbol of the tourism entity in Israel has a picture from this story of two people with like a staff holding one cluster of grapes. They were so big that two people had to carry them on a staff. So Moshe was thinking, oh, when they see this, they're like, whoa, we really want to go to this land. So that's another possibility. Then there's a very, very deep possibility that Moshe is so in tune, is so connected to God's will, that when he hears, as Rashi brought, it says that he took advice from the Shekhinah. And I have to mention, the Ramban says specifically, he does not hold by this idea that Moshe took advice from the Shekhinah. And this idea that the Shekhinah said, yeah, let them go. And I'm giving them a chance to make a mistake, so I won't be able to let them in the land. The Ramban says, no, he doesn't understand the story like this. And then there's this idea that there's a little bit of truth in all of these different ideas. It's not like one or the other. This is a very typical way of understanding Jewish text and disagreements between the sages. Whether it's here, this is not a halachic discussion. It's not a discussion of Jewish law. It's a discussion of just trying to understand the simple, literal meaning of what happened here. So there's a little bit of truth in all of these. Now we're going to see the same thing with the spies. So God makes it clear, send the best. Send the prince of each of the tribes. So Moshe does that. And then the question is, what was their motivation? So here again, we have many different opinions. These are brought down in the Talmud, in the Midrash, and in later commentaries. But just like the first thing we said about Moshe, it's possible it was just bad judgment. They went, they saw the land, and they were, good people, spiritual people, the princes of the tribes, and they wanted the best for the people. And they go and they see this, what they considered a very dangerous situation. And so they came back, and in all honesty, they said, we're not going to be able to defeat them. And again, the Ramban brings that Moshe himself says later that these people are stronger than you. But again, the difference is God has promised you the land, and he'll make it happen. So trust in God, he'll make it happen. So we could say they were kosher spies, but they had bad judgment. They came up with the wrong conclusion. Others say they lacked faith. How did they come up with this conclusion? Is they saw, but they lacked faith, and they allowed what they considered the reality to overcome God's promise to the people. God promised that they would inherit the land, and they didn't have the faith. Another explanation brought down is that they were very, very selfish people, and they were afraid that they were in position of power then. Let's say, call it, they were like the government ministers. So no one wants a new election because the sitting congressmen or senators or Knesset members, what have you, might lose their position. So one of the explanations is they went with a very, very twisted mentality that they didn't want to go into the land because they knew that when they go into the land, they very likely would lose their position. They were in power then, but who knows how long it's going to last. So they were very selfish, and they kind of plotted right from the beginning. Or as they went through the 40 days, they understood that they might lose their positions. Another explanation that it was brought later in the Chassidut, a couple of ideas. One is that they came to the land, and they came to the conclusion, when we come to the land, we're going to have to fight for it. And after we're done fighting for it, we're going to have to work. We're going to have to work the land. We're going to have to build the land. And it's just a lot of work. Right now, we're in the desert. We have the clouds of glory. We have the well of Miriam. We have manna from heaven. So, and we have all the time in the world to learn Torah. So why should we go into the land? Our whole lifestyle is going to change. We're not going to be fed with a golden spoon anymore. We're going to have to work and work hard. And so this is just another opinion that they felt would be better if we just stayed in the desert. The people, though, when they heard this, they didn't react that way. They said, let's pick new leaders and let's go back to Egypt. They were, in a sense, afraid of like forever in the desert. But anyways, this is just one of the opinions. Another opinion is that this is in last week's parsha already, B'halotcha. If you remember, Moshe is at his wit's end. And he says to God, he says, I can't bear this people by myself. I need help. So God says, choose 70 elders, and they will help you. I'm just saying this very, very quickly. So 70 elders are picked, but there was a problem because to make it even, you would have to have there are 12 tribes. So you would have to have 6 from each tribe. And that would make 72. But God said 70. So they did a drawing, called a kalpi, where they would draw lots. And 2 people would be left out. There would be 2 lots that would indicate that they were not chosen. So there were 2 people, Eldad and Medad, who decided, we'll just solve this problem. We will not show up at the Kalpi. We were, again, there were 72 chosen, but only 70 in the end would be the 70 elders. So they decided just let the other 70 take it. And then it says they began to prophesy in the camp. And Yehoshua runs to Moshe and says, Moshe, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Just stop them. And Moshe very famously says, would it be that all the people had prophecy. So then the question is, what were they prophesying? So Rashi brings the opinion they were prophesying Moshe will die, and Yoshua will lead the people into the land. So this prophecy was already in the air. And so the spies knew that if we go into Eretz Yisrael, Moshe is going to die. And they did not want Moshe to die. And so they plotted to give an evil report. They didn't know that the people would say, let's pick new leaders and go back to Egypt. But they plotted in order that Moshe would not die. Now, you could see that there's a wide range of possible motivations here that are brought down by different commentaries over the ages. So here, my intention was not to come up with a definitive idea of exactly what happened here. Because in truth, there are many, many things in the Torah that we have to admit we will never really know. We could understand that one of these opinions makes more sense to us. We could understand that the majority of commentators think this is how it was. But in many cases, we have to just be honest. The Talmud is very, very honest. Very honest. We're going to see in a few minutes that we don't know exactly. Each one of these opinions of the spies' motivation, Moshe's motivation, and even God's motivation, there are nuances. There are very subtle possibilities that it's not 100% clear. So again, my purpose here was just to try to bring some of the different opinions. So now I want to go back to one of the statements that Moshe asked him. Is there a tree there or not? And of course, the word here, tree, is in the singular. So some people would just say, well, that's how the Torah speaks sometimes. Instead of are there trees or not, it's understood if you use the singular, it also includes the plural. Some could say that, but look what Rashi says. Rashi says like this. Im yesh behem adam kasher sheyagin aleihem b'zechuto. He says, is there a kosher person, in other words, a righteous person who on his merit will guard the people against our conquering the land? So in other words, this is a symbolic statement. It's a very, very symbolic statement. Is there a tree or not? Rashi says, is there a righteous person that will defend them? And therefore, it will make it hard for us to conquer them. Because on the merit of this righteous person, maybe they'll be protected. So after the spies come back, and the 10 spies say, no, we can't make it. So Caleb makes an impassioned plea to the people. And he says, don't rebel against God. And don't be afraid, because the people of the land are like bread to us. This is like a symbolic statement, like, well, We'll eat them up. We won't have a problem with them. They're like bread to us. Sar silam mi alehem, v'Hashem itanu al tiraum. Their shadow, their image has departed from them, and God is with us. Don't be afraid. That's what Kalev is saying to them. So look what Rashi says here. What does it mean? Their shadow or their image has departed from them. So look what he says here. He says, Maginim v'chazakam ksherim shebehem metu. Because, now this is connected to the first statement of Rashi, where Rashi says, what does it mean? Is there a tree or not? So he says, remember, he says, is there a righteous person whose merit will defend them? Here, Kalev is saying a similar thing. When it says that their shadow is departed from them, he says, those people who were strong and righteous, they are dead. They're no longer with them. And listen to what he says, Eov shahaya magin alehem. So who is this talking about? This is talking about Job. That's what Rashi brings here. Job is this righteous person that Moshe is wondering, is this person alive? And if so, his merit could defend them against us. So you see that these two Rashis are similar. So this is what we're going to explore right now. We're going to explore a deeper understanding of like what is going on here. So first of all, we have to understand that the numerical value of eights is 160, and the numerical value of shadow, silam, their shadow has departed from them, is also 160. And that's why these two Rashis are going together. They're both referring to a righteous person who might be able to defend them. But here in this Rashi, he names the person, Job. So this leads us to some very, very interesting things. So first of all, in the tractate of Baba Batra on page 15a, if anyone wants to look into this, in 15a. So this is in a very, very fascinating part of the Gemara that is telling us who wrote or who completed certain of the 24 books of the Bible, of the Tanakh. It's not as simple as we might think. First of all, it begins with the whole thing. Who wrote the last 8 verses of the Torah? The last 8 verses of the Torah describes the death of Moshe. And so there's a question, did Moshe write this about his own death? Or is it possible that Yehoshua wrote the last 8 lines? And then it goes on, and it goes through different books that we assume we know who wrote them, but it's not 100% clear. And there's a process between writing the book and the version that we have now. We'll call it the edited version. So I'm just telling you, this is where what I'm about to say in the context comes up. So then they ask about the book of Job. The book of Job is considered one of the most philosophical books of the entire Bible. It's a very, very deep book. And so they ask, in the book of Job, it's not clear who wrote it. It tells the story of Job, but it never says that Job himself wrote this. So the first opinion, and it's really the only opinion. Who wrote the book of Job? Moshe. Moshe wrote the book of Job. Now, some of the sages say they don't agree to this, but there's no other alternative given. It's not like, no, Moshe didn't write this book because we think X wrote this book. There is no alternative. So it's not clear if you don't hold that Moshe wrote this book, but most people do. Most people hold that Moshe wrote the book of Iyov, and that's what we're going to look into in short. Now, here again, because Rashi mentions that this righteous person that might be a problem for Israel conquering the land. So first of all, Rashi says that Kalev was saying he's no longer alive. So then the Gemara goes into a long discussion as to who was Iyov and when did he live. And there is a very, very wide array of opinions. I didn't count it exactly. There might be up to 10 or more opinions in what generation did Iyov live. In other words, here we have the Rashi that says very clearly that he was there, but he died. So some say he lived then, at the time that Israel came out of Egypt. One of the Midrashim says he was one of the advisors of Pharaoh. Pharaoh had 3 advisors. And he asked them, when the astrologers said, we see that a redeemer is about to be born to the Jews. And so Pharaoh is like, oh, okay, what do we do? What do we do? So there were 3 advisors. Yitro, he fled. He didn't want any part of this. He fled. And because he left the scene, he was rewarded later to be Moshe's father-in-law and to become Jewish and to be at Har Sinai. The other one was Iyov, Job. And Job remained silent. And the other one was Bilam. And Bilam says, throw all the boys in the Nile and drown them. And that will take care of your problem, until the astrologers tell you that whoever the Redeemer was is no longer alive. And so they say, because Iyov was silent, that is how all of the difficult things that happened to him in the book of Iyov happened. So I'm just going to mention that it's so interesting, because one of the connections when Moshe says, Ha'im yesh eitz im ayin. So where, according to the book of Job, was Job from? He was from the land of Uz. Uz obviously is connected to eitz, the tree. And so that's one of the reasons that Iyov is alluded to here as this righteous person. So just to show you, just a follow-up of this idea that there are certain things that we won't know. There's no conclusion as to when Iyov lived exactly. But one of the opinions, and many people hold by this, many opinions. This is from it says a certain scholar was sitting before Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, and he said, Eov lo haya v'lo nivra, ela mashal haya. He gives the opinion, and again, immediately people disagree with him. Nonetheless, many people hold that this is the correct understanding. What did he say? He said he never was, and he was never created. The whole book of Eov is a parable. And when you read the book of Eov, especially the beginning of how it's determined in the court in heaven, with a discussion between the Satan and God, whether Eov deserves to be rewarded or to be punished. Anyways, this opinion is held by many. And that's why many people hold that that's Moshe who is writing this parable called the Book of Job. Now, it actually continues. Not only is there a whole discussion, when did he live, if he lived at all? And then there's a whole discussion, was he Jewish or not Jewish? A whole discussion, and everyone brings their proof. Everyone brings their verse. Everyone brings their proof text, whether he was Jewish or not Jewish, whether he lived or he didn't live, and who wrote it. And then there's a whole discussion, was he really righteous or not? So based on that, we're going to go to Tractate Brachot, 7a, Tractate Brachot. And it says there are three things that Moshe requested from God, and God answered in the positive. The first thing is he requested that the Shekhinah rests on Israel, and God agreed. And the second thing he asked was that the Shekhinah would not dwell among the nations, in order that Israel would be distinct. It would be clear to everyone that they were chosen. And God agreed. And the third one, there's a disagreement whether God, in a sense, granted this to Moshe or not. Bikesh lo'odio derachav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe requested from God, show me your ways. This is a request after the golden calf. And Moshe is pleading for the people. So he says clearly, Hodi'eni na et derachecha. Please show me the way that you operate in the world. So the Gemara asks, what is Moshe getting at? What does he want to know? What do you mean? What are your ways? So the Gemara says like this. Amar lefanav, Moshe said to God, I'm sorry, one second. Rabbona Shalom, master of the world. Mipnei ma yesh tzadik v'tov lo. Why is there a righteous person that has everything good? V'yesh tzadik v'ralo, but there is also a righteous person that bad things happen to them. Yesh rasha v'tov lo, there are evil people who have it good. Yesh rasha v'ralo, but there are evil people who have it bad. This is the classic question that we term, why do good things happen to bad people? And why do good things happen to bad people? I don't know if I said it, I'm going to say it again. Why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? That's what Moshe is asking, according to the Gemara, when he says, show me your ways. I want to understand. And then the Gemara goes into a whole discussion of why do the righteous suffer? Why do evil people prosper? And how to understand this. Now, the reason I'm bringing this is, in a sense, the main story of the book of Job. The whole book of Job, it begins that Job is this righteous person, a good person. And then Satan comes and says, are you sure he's righteous? If he was tested, you think he would still be righteous? And God says, okay, you can test him. And then everything goes wrong in Job's life. And the whole rest of the book is Job trying to understand what is happening to him, why it's happening, and not like just accepting it. And then some of his friends come and they come to comfort him, but in the end they give him rebuke. And the whole book is about this question that Moshe is asking of God. Please explain to me, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to evil people? If we go back, after Moshe comes out from Pharaoh, the first time he goes and he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh makes it even worse for the people. Now they have to gather their own straw. So Moshe comes back and says to God, why have you done evil to this people? And why have you sent me? You said you were sending me to save them, and it's gotten worse. So here we could understand that Moshe is the one who wrote the book of Job. From what I just explained from the tractate of Brachot, we see that this was something on Moshe's mind. And so according to the opinion, again, not everyone agrees, that Job never lived. There was never a historical person called Job. And even if there was, let's say the Midrash, that he was one of the three, that still this opinion, well, actually that opinion is that he never existed at all. And even that Midrash, we know that the Midrash is highly symbolic, highly metaphorical, allegorical. So were Bilam, Eov, and Yitro truly the advisors of Pharaoh? Or it's a way for us to understand who Pharaoh was and who Bilam was and who Yitro was and who Eov was. This is one of the deepest understandings of the Midrash, because we know that we don't take all the Midrashim literally. Sometimes we do, but in many cases, perhaps most, they're not meant to be taken literally. So here we see that this parsha is full of questions. There are many answers. There are many ways to understand it. This is a classic example of Shivim Panim LaTorah, that there's 70 perspectives of the Torah. And as I said before, let's say you take the spies, and we brought, I think, 5 different opinions. So our first stance would be, well, which one of them is correct? Which one was the motivation? But life doesn't work like that. Human beings are very, very complex. A human being can have many different emotions, many different strategies, many different perspectives simultaneously. It's what we might call love-hate. That a person can truly love someone and hate them at the same time. Be jealous of them, but want to honor them. Human beings are very complex. So in this whole story, we see the complexity of even understanding the simple opening verse of Sh'lach Lecha, send. Is God commanding? Is he not commanding? If he is commanding how to do it, why does he go along with it? Why does Moshe go along with it? What did the spies have in mind? And this fascinating connection between Moshe and Eov, as discussed in these different Rashis, about is there a tree or not? So may we be blessed to continue to delve into the Torah. And like I said before, everyone is welcome to have their opinion. Some people could have very strong opinions. This is how I understand this whole story played itself out. That was not my purpose today. My purpose was to show, in a sense, how complicated it is. But that doesn't mean that we can't come to a basic understanding of how we think this story played itself out. And I'll just end it. It's actually somewhat important because I didn't mention this, but I will mention it. The Torah is everlasting. And for example, when we came to the Reed Sea, and on one side we're blocked by the water, the Egyptians are coming, we saw that Israel had different response. Some wanted to fight against the Egyptians. Some wanted to flee. Some wanted to just give up and just do with us what you want. And others wanted to go forward into the sea. And the same thing with Sh'lach Lecha. I write about this in Orchard of Delights, that here the major question is, can we conquer the land or not? And that question is very alive today, very alive with, can we, should we hold on to all of the territories that we conquered in the 6-Day War? Or for peace, for compromise, for because we have no choice, because the world won't let us, whatever. But the story of Sh'lach Lecha is very contemporary, extremely contemporary. And I would say it's even connected very, very, very much with the war we're involved in with right now. Because in the beginning, there was absolute unity. We're going to go into Gaza, we're going to defeat them, and they're never going to be able to do what they did again. Here we are 8 months later, and now people are asking, maybe we can't win this war. Maybe we can't defeat Hamas. Now what do we do? So I'm just pointing out, again, I'm not proposing answers here. I'm not telling people what they should think, but I'm just pointing out how, when we say that the Torah is archetypal and the Torah is everlasting, the very issues of, can we go into the land? Can we not go into land? These were the same questions at the beginning of the Zionist movement. Can we be successful in setting up a state in Palestine or not? It's the same energy, the same questions play themselves out over and over again. This is an extremely important understanding of this parsha. And so when we go through it, we should really understand how, especially in the last 120 years since the beginning of Zionism and all the wars that we fought, and the 6-Day War, and we gave up the Sinai and we gave up Gaza. The questions are, was that the right response? Was it not the right response? And so I'm just saying that those questions in a certain way should strengthen our understanding of the Torah being everlasting. It is so real. Anyways, God should give us the understanding to know how to deal with